What open data is doing is it's forcing government to publish lots of this locked up treasure that they've had inside their organization for years out to the public. And once out to the public, we're finding these volunteer armies in hackathons across the country who are taking advantage of this information and transforming it into new interfaces and new ways, at first, for the public to use it, but also what I found fascinating in this conference is it isn't just the public that's using this information, it's government itself. Because once the data's out there, there's no longer an organizational barrier to sharing it. And that's really fascinating because this open data is helping to improve the efficiency and operation of government itself by pushing data out into a public space where every organization within the government can take advantage of it. And that's what I think is really exciting.
And we're living in a digital age where this data is easy to collect and it's available. And I think there's an opportunity for various opportunities for government to kind of use this data to make better decisions and to use it in a way to communicate more directly with citizens and to get citizen input. To have better data, to know more about what's going on. The second thing, frankly, is you have to have people within government who know how to use it, who know how to collect it, who know how to present it. The challenge is also, do you have the right kinds of people? Can you make this data accessible in a clear way?
I'm not really sure how governments are prioritizing what information to publish. Like, one of the things that we hear from our customers is that they start by publishing data which is easiest to publish. That is, things that have been in the public record before, things that were published in other formats. They might have been in books, they might have been on websites, they might have been in static text. Those are low-hanging fruit for every government that has a mandate to publish open data. It takes much longer to figure out how to publish those old repositories that they have.
Best practices, I think, is developing, emerging. I think there's some cities in the Bay Area that have been quite active. Palo Alto comes to mind. One of the issues will be, will different cities in California have the equal ability to generate the kind of portals and the kinds of analysis that is needed? Sort of the equal opportunity concern. You know, do less well endowed cities have the ability to do this? But then this may be a kind of an opportunity for regional cooperation, for larger scale entities emerging.
I think it's going to become a part of doing business. I think it's the next wave of government innovation, that people just chalk this down to the cost of doing business regardless of municipal size. I think it's something we're going to see growing around the country and around the world.
If you've been following what I've been writing and speaking about in the government space, you know I've been talking about this idea of government as a platform. Now, what do I mean by that? First off, I do think there's an enormous opportunity for governments to make use of the Web 2.0 platform technologies, cloud computing, all the collective intelligence apps that are being built to harvest knowledge from individuals and turn them into useful services, mobile devices, social media. All of these are part of what I've been calling the Web 2.0 platform. And so in one sense, Gov 2.0 is simply government also becoming part of that platform. We see this with web services, cloud computing, et cetera, initiatives in government. But I mean more than that. And that's what I really want to talk a little bit about here. The first thing that I really want to get across is this idea of getting away from what Donald Kettle called vending machine government. This is the idea that citizens put in taxes and they get out services, as if government were some kind of gigantic vending machine. And we have these protests, which are really the equivalent of shaking the vending machine. And that's really not a terribly interesting model of how government ought to relate to its citizens. What's really interesting with this metaphor is you look at the alternative, which is the marketplace. You know, here's this, just a shot of a supermarket shelf. How insane is that? I mean, You know, back before the fall of the Berlin Wall, you know, there was a big supermarket in West Berlin called KaDeWe, where they basically were just in your face, you know, with here is the bounty of the marketplace. It was a sort of a showplace of what happens when you enable a marketplace. And for all that's wrong with our free market economy, it is incredibly good at producing this huge variety of goods and services. And we see this in the computer world most recently with the enormous transformation that the iPhone brought to the smartphone marketplace. I mean, it was a cool phone. I mean, the Apple iPhone was a very cool phone, that first generation. But what really set it apart was when they turned it into a platform. And all of a sudden, the 15 or 16 applications that were written by Apple turned into nearly 200,000 applications written by anybody who had a good idea. And some of those applications are silly, but some of them are profound and useful. And that device has become sort of the front wave of this next generation of computing. And so, in a similar way, government thinking like a platform provider means that we stop saying we're going to deliver the finished, complete package, and that's all you got. And we're going to start thinking about designing programs that are enablers. So this is clearly a big part of the story of data.gov. It's trying to take all the government's data assets and turn them into a platform that developers outside of government can build on. And of course, this has been going on for a long time. You know, just take weather as an example. You know, whether you get your weather from Bing or Google or Yahoo or any of these iPhone apps or the Weather Channel, AccuWeather, or Weather Underground, or even little specialized site like iwindsurf.com and ikitesurf.com, they're all getting their data from services that were put up by the US government. And yes, there is the National Weather Service website, but that's not where most people go to get their weather data. The government has become a platform provider for weather data, and the marketplace has delivered that in countless ways to citizens. And I think that is the promise of data.gov. It's not visualization, it's not transparency, it really is this ability of the marketplace to find leverage in that data and to build businesses. And I think we're starting to see some really important ones. But I want to say this, the title that was given to this talk was not just government as a platform, it was government as a platform for greatness. And I want to talk a little bit about what greatness means when you think about government. I want to look at some historical examples because this idea of a platform extends to more than our use of computer technology. Let's go back to our original Gov 2.0 or Gov 1.0 platform here in the United States. You know, the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. There's some amazing lessons here for anybody who wants to think like a platform provider. You know, sometimes you have to throw away what went before and start fresh. You know, these guys not only threw away the monarchy of Britain, they threw away the Articles of the Confederation, their first version of the government of the United States. They had a complete new rev. It was visionary, it was hard. They didn't get it right the first time. GPS. What an amazing story this is. If you read the history, you see how many doubters there were, how many people thought, even for the military, this was way out there, right? It was a massive investment for uncertain return. And policy decisions have enormous impact. You can see that Ronald Reagan, who decided in 1983, almost 30 years ago, 28 years ago, to open up GPS for civilian use, could be seen as the father of services like Foursquare. So big marketplaces take time to develop. So I want to ask you, what is hard today? You know, sunsetting programs. You know, the founders of our nation had the courage to start over. And actually, this is true also even in technology. If you read a book like Inside Steve's Brain, which is a book about Steve Jobs, you see how when he came back to Apple as the CEO, he threw away almost all of their products. They had 40 or 50 different models of computer. He said, we're going to offer 3. Enormous trouble. He threw a lot of stuff out. You look at the revolution, again, of the iPhone, and you compare that with the problems that other vendors had who wouldn't throw away their existing systems, who wouldn't start over. So we in government have to seize this moment, this opportunity of this technological change represented by Web 2.0, by cloud computing, to really rethink our use of technology. Don't just do it incrementally. Really have the courage to start over. Think about healthcare. This is a massive problem for the country. And you know, can we really use these new technologies to rein in costs, to instrument the system so that we know what things cost, that we create feedback loops in the way that applications like Google learn from their users constantly? Can we have a healthcare system that gets better the more people use it, instead of the worse, more people use it? You know, energy and climate change. Will we keep kicking the can down the field? Or will we rise to the challenge of figuring out what the hell to do about this terrible set of problems that we're facing in terms of energy independence, in terms of climate change? Education. What does it look like in the 21st century? Do we have the courage to start over, to think how we can use new technology to transform education? Right? Financial reform. It occurred to me recently as you read about, for example, Germany is defending the euro. You know, this is like an attack by a non-state actor, the financial system, fighting against our collective good. You know, we have the courage to stand up and say, we have to fix this in some fundamental way. Now, as technologists, we can't tackle necessarily all these problems, but we can do our part. We can do our part to be bold, to be brave, to think fresh, because that is what will make a platform for greatness.
Actually, almost 20 years ago, when I wanted to reframe the way we use information, the way we work together, I invented the World Wide Web. Now, 20 years on, Ted, I want to ask your help in a new reframing. So going back to 1989, I wrote a memo suggesting a global hypertext system. Nobody really did anything with it very much. But 18 months later, this is how innovation happens. 18 months later, my boss said I could do it on the side as a sort of a play project, kick the tires of a new computer we got. And so he gave me the time to code it up. So I basically roughed out what HTML should look like, hypertext protocol, HTTP, the idea of URLs, these names for things, which started with HTTP. I wrote the code and put it out there. Why did I do it? Well, it was basically frustration. I was frustrated. I was working as a software engineer in this huge, very exciting lab. Lots of people coming from all over the world. They brought all sorts of different computers with them. They had all sorts of different data formats, all sorts of kinds of documentation systems, so that in all that diversity, if I wanted to figure out how to build something out of a bit of this and a bit of this, everything I looked into, I had to connect to some new machine, I had to learn to run some new program, I would find the data, maybe the information I wanted in some new data format, and these were all incompatible. It was just very frustrating. The frustration was that there's all this unlocked potential. In fact, on all these disks, there were documents. So if you just imagine them all being part of some big virtual documentation system in the sky, then, say, on the internet, then life would be so much easier. Well, once you've had an idea like that, it kind of gets under your skin, and even if people don't read your memo, actually he did. It was found after he died, his copy, it was found he'd written vague but exciting in pencil on the corner. But in general, it was really difficult to explain what the web was like. It's difficult to explain to people now that it was difficult then. But then, okay, when TED started, there was no web. So things like click didn't have the same meaning. I could show somebody a piece of hypertext, a page which has got links, and we click on a link, and bing, there will be another hypertext page. Not impressive. You know, we've seen that. We've got things on hypertext on CD-ROMs. What was difficult was to get them to imagine. So imagine that that link could have gone to virtually any document you could imagine. All right? That is the leap that it was very difficult for people to make. Well, some people did. So yeah, it was difficult to explain, but there was a grassroots movement. That is what has made it most fun. That has been the most exciting thing, not the technology, not the things people have done with it, but actually the community, the spirit of all these people getting together, sending me emails. That's what it was like then. Do you know what? It's funny, but Right now, it's kind of like that again. I asked everybody, more or less, to put their documents. I said, could you put your documents on this web thing? And you did. Thanks. It's been a blast, hasn't it? I mean, it's been quite interesting because we found out that the things that happen with the web really sort of blow us away. They're much more than we'd originally imagined when we put together the little initial website that we started off with. Now, I want you to put your data on the web. Turns out that there is still huge unlocked potential. There is still a huge frustration that people have because we haven't got data on the web as data. What do you mean, data? What's the difference? Documents, data? Well, documents you read, okay. More or less, you can read them, you can follow links from them, and that's it. Data, you can do all kinds of stuff with the computer. Who was here, or otherwise seen Hans Rosling's talk? When Hans Rosling was at TED, yeah, one of the great, yes, a lot of people have seen it because it was one of the great TED talks. Hans put up this presentation in which he showed for various different countries in various different colors, he showed income levels on one axis, and he showed infant mortality, and he showed this thing animated through time. So he'd taken this data and made a presentation which just shattered a lot of myths that people had about the economics in the developing world. He put up a slide a little bit like this. It had underground all the data. Okay, data is brown and boxy and boring, and that's how we think of it, isn't it, data? Because data you can't naturally use by itself. But in fact, data drives a huge amount of what happens in our lives. And it happens because somebody takes that data and does something with it. In this case, Hans had put the data together. He found it from all kinds of United Nations websites and things. He'd put it together, combined it into something more interesting than the original pieces. And then he'd put it into this software, which I think his son developed originally, and produced this wonderful presentation. And Hans made a point of saying, look, it's really important to have a lot of data. And I was happy to see that at the party last night that he was still saying very forcibly, it's really important to have a lot of data. So I want us now to think about not just 2 pieces of data being connected or 6 like he did, but I want to think about a world where everybody has put data on the web, and so virtually everything you can imagine is on the web. And I'm calling that linked data. The technology is linked data, and it's extremely simple. If you want to put something on the web, there are 3 rules. First thing is that those HTTP names, those things that start with HTTP:, we're using them not just for documents, now we're using them for things that the documents are about. We're using them for people. We're using them for places. We're using them for your products. We're using them for events. All kinds of conceptual things, they have names now that start with HTTP. Second rule, if I take one of these HTTP names and I look it up, I go and do the web thing with it, and I fetch the data using the HTTP protocol from the web, I will get back some data in a standard format, which is kind of useful data that somebody might like to know about that thing, about that event, who's at the event, whatever it is, about that person, where they were born, things like that. So the second rule is I get important information back. The third rule is that when I get back that information, it's not just got somebody's height and weight and when they were born, it's got relationships. Data is relationships. It's interesting, data is relationships. It's got this person was born in Berlin. Berlin is in Germany, and when it has relationships, whenever it expresses a relationship, then the other thing that it's related to is given one of those names that starts HTTP. So I can go ahead and look that thing up. So I look up a person. I can look up then the city where they were born. Then I can look up the region it's in, and the town it's in, and the population of it, and so on. So I can browse this stuff. So that's it, really. That is linked data. I wrote an article entitled Linked Data a couple of years ago, and soon after that, things started to happen. The idea of linked data is that we get lots and lots and lots of these boxes that Hans had, and we get lots and lots and lots of things sprouting. It's not just a whole lot of other plants. It's not just a root supplying a plant, but for each of those plants, whatever it is, a presentation, an analysis, somebody's looking for patterns in the data, they get to look at all the data, and they get to connect it together. And the really important thing about data is the more things you have to connect together, the more powerful it is. So, linked data. The meme went out there, and Pretty soon, Chris Bitzer at the Freie Universität in Berlin was one of the first people to put interesting things up. He noticed that Wikipedia, you know Wikipedia, the online encyclopedia with lots and lots of interesting documents in it? Well, in those documents, there are little squares, little boxes, and in those information boxes, there's data. So he wrote a program to take the data, extract it from Wikipedia, and put it into a blob of linked data on the web, which he called DBpedia. DBpedia is represented by the blue blob in the middle of this slide. And if you actually go and look up Berlin, you'll find that there are other blobs of data which also have stuff about Berlin, and they're linked together. So if you pull the data from DBpedia about Berlin, you'll end up pulling up these other things as well. And the exciting thing is it's starting to grow. This is just the grassroots stuff again, okay? Now let's think about data for a bit. Data comes, in fact, in lots and lots of different forms. Think of the diversity of the web. It's a really important thing that the web allows you to put all kinds of data up there. So it is with data. I could talk about all kinds of data. We could talk about government data. Enterprise data is really important. There's scientific data, there's personal data, there's weather data, there's data about events, there's data about talks, and there's news, and there's all kinds of stuff. I'm just going to mention a few of them so that you get the idea of the diversity of it, so that you also see how much unlocked potential. Let's start with government data. Barack Obama said in a speech that the American government data would be available on the internet in accessible formats. And I hope that they will put it up as linked data. That's important. Why is it important? Not just for transparency. Yeah, transparency of government is important, but that data, this is the data from all the government departments. Think about how much of that data is about how life is lived in America. It's actually useful. It's got value. I can use it in my company. I could use it as a kid to do my homework. So we're talking about making the world run better by making this data available. In fact, if you're responsible, if you know about some data in government department, often you find that these people, they're very tempted to keep it, to Hans calls it database hugging. You hug your database, you don't want to let it go until you've made a beautiful website for it. Well, I'd like to suggest that right before you, yes, make a beautiful website. Who am I to say don't make a beautiful website? Make a beautiful website, but first, give us the unadulterated data. We want the data. We want unadulterated data. Okay, we have to ask for raw data now. And I'm going to ask you to practice that, okay? Can you say raw? Raw. Can you say data? Can you say now? Right. Raw data now. Raw. Practice that. It's important because you have no idea the number of excuses people come up with to hang on to their data and not give it to you, even though you've paid for it as a taxpayer. And it's not just America, it's all over the world. And it's not just governments, of course, it's enterprises as well. So I'm just going to mention a few other sorts of data. Here we are at TED, and all the time we are very conscious of the huge challenges which the human society has right now. Curing cancer. Understanding the brain for Alzheimer's, understanding the economy to make it a little bit more stable, understanding how the world works. The people who are going to solve those are scientists. They have half-formed ideas in their head. They try to communicate those over the web, but a lot of the state of knowledge of the human race at the moment is on databases, often sitting in their computers and actually currently not shared. In fact, I'll just go into one area. If you're looking at Alzheimer's, for example, drug discovery, there is a whole lot of linked data which is just coming out because scientists in that field realize this is a great way of getting out of those silos because they had their genomics data in one database and in one building, and they had their protein data in another. Now they are sticking it onto linked data, and now they can ask a sort of question that you probably wouldn't ask, I wouldn't ask, they would. What proteins are involved in signal transduction and also related to pyramidal neurons? Well, you take that mouthful and if you put it into Google, of course there's no page on the web which has answered that question because nobody has asked that question before. You get 223,000 hits, no results you can use. You ask the linked data which they've now put together, 32 hits, each of which is a protein which has those properties, and you can look at the power of being able to ask those questions of a scientist. Questions which actually bridge across different disciplines is really a complete sea change. It's very, very important. Scientists are totally stymied at the moment. The power of the data that other scientists have collected is locked up, and we need to get it unlocked so we can tackle those huge...
Last year here at TED,
I asked you to give me your data, put the data on the web on the basis that if people put data onto the web, government data, scientific data, community data, whatever it is, it will be used by other people to do wonderful things in ways that they never have imagined. So today, I'm back just to show you a few things, to show you, in fact, there is an open data movement afoot now around the world. The cry of raw data now, which I made people make in the auditorium, was heard around the world. So let's roll the video. Classic story, the first one which a lot of people picked up, was when in March 10th, in fact, soon after TED, Paul Clark in the UK government blogged that, oh, I've just got some raw data. Here it is. It's about bicycle accidents. 2 days it took the Times Online to make a map, a mashable map. We call these things mashups. A mashup user interface allows you to go in there and have a look and find out whether your bicycle route to work was affected. Here's more data, traffic survey data, again, put up by the UK government. And because they put it up using the linked data standards, then a user could just make a map just by clicking. Does this data affect things? Well, actually, let's get back to 2008. Look at Zanesville, Ohio. Here's a map a lawyer made, put it on at the water plant, see which houses are there, which houses have been connected to the water, and he got from other data sources information to show which houses are occupied by white people. Well, there was too much of a correlation, he felt, between which houses were occupied by white people and which houses had water, and the judge was not impressed either. The judge was not impressed to the tune of $10.9 million. That's the power of taking one piece of data, another piece of data, putting it together, and showing the result. Let's look at some data from the UK now. This is UK government data, completely independent site. Where does my money go? Allows anybody to go there and burrow down. You can burrow down by a particular type of spending, or you can go through all the different regions and compare them. So that's happening in the UK. With UK government data, yes, certainly you can do it over here. Here's a site which allows you to look at the recovery spending in California, and take an arbitrary example, Long Beach, California. You can go and have a look at what recovery money they've been spending on different things such as energy. In fact, this is the graph of the number of data sets in the repositories at data.gov and data.gov.uk, and I'm delighted to see a great competition between the UK in blue and the US in red. How can you use this stuff? Well, for example, if you have lots of data about places, you can take it from a postcode, which is like a zip +4, for a specific group of houses, you can make paper, print off a paper which has got very, very specific things about the bus stops, the things specifically near you. Larger scale, this is a mashup of the data which was released about the Afghan elections. It allows you to set your own criteria for what sort of things you want to look at. The red circles are polling stations selected by your criteria, and then you can select also other things on the map to see what other factors, like the threat level. So that was government data. I also talked about community-generated. In fact, I edited. This is the wiki map. This is the OpenStreetMap. Terrace Theatre I actually put on the map because it wasn't on the map before TED last year. I was not the only person editing the OpenStreetMap. Each flash on this visualization put together by ITO World shows an edit in 2009 made to the OpenStreetMap. Let's now spin the world during the same year. Every flash is an edit. Somebody somewhere looking at the OpenStreetMap and realizing it could be better. You can see Europe is ablaze with updates. Some places, perhaps not as much as they should be. Here, focusing in on Haiti. The map of Port-au-Prince at the end of 2009 was not all it could be. Not as good as the map of California. Fortunately, just after the earthquake, GOI, commercial company, released satellite imagery with a license which allowed the open source community to use it. This is January, time-lapse, people editing. That's the earthquake. After the earthquake, immediately, people all over the world, mappers who wanted to help and could, looked at that imagery, built the map, quickly building up. We're focusing now on Port-au-Prince. The blue is refugee camps these volunteers have spotted from the air. So now we have immediately a real-time map showing where there are refugee camps. It rapidly became the best map to use if you're doing relief work in Port-au-Prince. Witness the fact it's here on this Garmin device being used by a rescue team in Haiti. There's the map showing on the left-hand side there that hospital. Actually, that's a hospital ship. This is a real-time map. That shows blocked roads, damaged buildings, refugee camps. It shows things that are needed. So If you've been involved in that at all, I just wanted to say, whatever you've been doing, whether you've just been shouting raw data now, you've been putting government or scientific data online, I just wanted to take this opportunity to say thank you very much, and we have only just started.
The department is very involved in opening up data for innovation. So basically, the Health and Human Services Department has treasure troves of data. I mean, tons and tons of it, from claims data to survey data to individual level data. It's just something that we procure because we're the government, and Medicaid and Medicare are the biggest payers of healthcare in the nation. So what we want to do is liberate this data and give it to entrepreneurs, give it to hackers, developers, and say, take this data, it's the fuel for innovation, create some really cool things and really useful things that will solve some of the big problems in healthcare that we see. We've seen some really cool stuff so far. iPhone and Android applications we've seen are a lot of consumer-based applications. So a great one is actually called 100 Plus, for instance. And what they do, their whole model is to make healthcare easier. It gives you suggestions on what you can do, like take the stairs or have dinner with friends, and it increases your life score based on your decisions. And what it does on top of that is it integrates data from the health data, open health data, and it uses that data to give you more information about what you should be doing to live a healthier life. Something else we've seen is an application by a company called Procured Health, where they're targeting hospitals in particular, where they're using FDA recall data and importing that into their application for hospitals, and they're giving hospitals this information so they don't buy hospital equipment that's been recalled. And we're encouraging developers to take some of the claims data right now that is available and use it, create really cool things with it. There's a lot of things you can do around quality, that you can see trends in people's health. You can see, even geographic distribution. Like, for some reason, people in El Paso, Texas have a higher probability of having diabetes than people in Austin, Texas. Tell me why. Blue Button data is basically your personal health record, and it started with the Veterans Affairs Administration, and the Health and Human Services Department adopted it. And you can download it now. Anyone can download it now if you're part of Medicare. And all you have to do is click it, you get it, but the format you get it in is an ASCII text file, which is a horrible, horrible format, and basically all you can do with it is print it, and it's horrible. So a challenge that we posed actually a couple months ago was the redesign of the Blue Button. So basically, people to develop applications that would take that Blue Button data, redesign your personal health record, and make it more usable. And we saw, I want to say, I think 6 great applications that are winners, and there's more information on challenge.gov. With opening up this data, it's not just health data that's useful, because that's fantastic, but it's really a mashup of the data, so we get a real complete picture. Data really is this amazing fuel where you can see, this whole world in a whole nother way. It's almost like the Matrix. Once you look at the data, you're like, oh my God, it's amazing.
How is technology changing your world? Join the conversation at tdo.org/